This is the Vanderbilt dynasty, once the richest family in the world, and there's a reason why you haven't heard much about them. You see, unlike the Rothschilds and Rockefellers, today the Vanderbilts are pretty much unknown. They don't own any big businesses, they don't donate to universities anymore, and they don't have any skyscrapers named after them. But once upon a time, the Vanderbilt family once had more money than there was in the US Treasury, over $200 million. Today, that would be worth around $400 billion, beating out today's richest dynasty, the Walmart dynasty, by a long shot. Their patriarch, Cornelius Vanderbilt, had turned a $100 loan into a $100 million fortune in just 66 years, making him one of the wealthiest historical figures of all time. But fast forward just 88 years, basically fast forward just one lifetime, and not a single living Vanderbilt is a millionaire. Not even one of them has $1 million to their name. After not even 100 years, and that $2.7 billion in today's money is gone. The Vanderbilt dynasty's fall from grace is a story of rags to riches greed, kids being born into money and power that they didn't earn, and learning just how easy it is to lose it all. While you've been watching this video, your paycheck became worth almost 8% less. That is the real impact of inflation on your earnings. But instead of just accepting it and blaming Washington or the Fed, who you have no control over, you gotta take the power back into your own hands. That's why when I did some research, I came across a fintech startup valued at $1 billion called Masterworks, and what they're doing is pretty cool. Masterworks lets you invest in blue chip art, an asset class that saw price appreciation of 23% on average when inflation is above 3%, like it is right now. Their team of art experts analyzes over 60,000 data points to find trending artists with high potential for growth. They then purchase the paintings by these artists, and then after that, Masterworks members can purchase shares representing an investment in those artworks on their platform. Since their inception in 2017, Masterworks has successfully offered and sold 2 paintings from its collection, each realizing a net annual gain in excess of 30% per work. Although this is not an indication of Masterworks' overall performance, and past performance is not indicative of future results, it's still pretty cool. So join over 300,000 other members on the platform by using my special link below to get priority access. So pause the video and click the link below to get priority access to Masterworks now. Thanks to Masterworks for sponsoring this video. Cornelius Vanderbilt was born in a time where entire industries were being born for the taking. Oil, railways, and for Cornelius, it was shipping. At 11 years old, he dropped out of school to help on his parents' farm in Staten Island, New York City. A few years later, he decided that life on the farm wasn't for him. And there was one thing he always wanted, a boat of his own. Back in the 1800s, the New York harbor was filled with men sailing up and down the canals, making money transporting passengers and cargo. And Cornelius wanted in. He wanted a taste of real money. So before his 16th birthday, he made a deal with his mom. He would borrow $100, equal to around $2,300 today, and in exchange, he would turn an 8-acre overgrown field into a healthy cornfield. His mom thought it was impossible, but she underestimated Cornelius. He got all his friends to help out, and true to his word, on the day of his 16th birthday, the job was done. So he took that $100 loan and set off to the harbor to buy a boat. He was so eager to be recognized and respected for his work that other sailors started calling him the Commodore for fun, and the nickname stuck. So he started transporting passengers for 18 cents a trip, and he made more money than he ever dreamed of. Then came the advent of steamships. Cornelius saw the writing on the wall and jumped into the steamship business. Within just a few years, he had turned his one boat company into an entire fleet that rivaled the biggest shipping company in New York. Cornelius had finally made it big. He was new money. But Cornelius was a rough man. He wasn't educated, he wasn't sophisticated, he didn't fit into high society. So even with his newfound riches, none of the upper-class New Yorkers wanted anything to do with him. So he went back home, and on the same farm where he had grown up, he built a giant mansion overlooking the ships. By the time Cornelius turned 56, he was the head of the largest shipping empire in the world. But it wasn't enough, he wanted more. America was on the edge of civil war. Investing now would be a suicide mission, so he did the unthinkable. Around the same time, America's very first transcontinental railroad was being built. This railroad would make transporting cargo and passengers cheaper and faster than ever. And Cornelius, never to go half in on anything, sold every last ship he had and invested everything into the railway. His gamble pays off. By the end of the war, he was the richest man in America with a net worth of $68 million, making him a billionaire today. By now, Cornelius was 71 years old. He needed to start thinking about his family's future. His favorite son George had died in the war. Now the only boys who were left were William and Cornelius Jr. Neither of them were any good at being businessmen, but he had to choose one. So he settled for the oldest, William. He would become the heir to the entire Vanderbilt fortune. Cornelius may have been an old man, but he was nowhere near the end of his career. When his competitors started taking his customers, he went on the offensive. First, he tried negotiating with them to make them pay a percentage for every passenger they brought into New York. These young businessmen refused. There was no way they were going to get ordered around by such an old man. But there was only one problem. They had underestimated how far the Commodore would go to crush his rivals. You see, Cornelius Vanderbilt owned the only rail bridge into New York City. All his competitors were using it to move their passengers and cargo. So Cornelius again did something no one expected. He put a blockade on the bridge, so none of his competitors' trains could get in or out of New York. Every day they lost millions of dollars. With all the railroad companies hemorrhaging money, their presidents started selling their shares at record speeds. They wanted to get their money out before their stock prices hit rock bottom. The news reaches Wall Street and triggers a major sell-off. Cornelius tells his son to buy up as many shares as he can.
Buy everything you can.
And voila, Cornelius Vanderbilt pulls off the first hostile takeover in history. In just a few days, Cornelius Vanderbilt had taken over his biggest competitor and created the largest single railroad company in America. The Commodore had become the undisputed railroad monopolist. He built statues of himself in his honor and created a major railway station bringing 3 major railroads together. He called it Grand Central. And Grand Central still stands to this day as a symbol of the Vanderbilt legacy. But then, Cornelius dies at 82 years old. His net worth stood at $100 million, or $2.7 billion today. And almost all of it goes to his disappointment of a son, William Billy Vanderbilt. Before he died, Cornelius Vanderbilt told his son, "Any fool can make a fortune. It takes a man of brains to hold onto it after it is made." William Billy Vanderbilt was his father's least favorite son. After Billy got married, his father had so little patience for him that he sent him and his wife to go live on a farm, so they wouldn't be there to bother him. But then Cornelius' youngest and favorite son died, and suddenly, the Vanderbilt dynasty needed a new heir. Someone to take the reins when the Commodore retired or died, whichever came first. So Billy was pulled into the family business. And when he finally took over his dad's empire, he proved just how great of a businessman he really was. You see, Cornelius Vanderbilt always wanted more. He wanted more control, more money, more influence. But his son was nothing like that. He was okay with compromising. And in the 8 years between his father's death and his own, Billy doubled the family fortune, going from $100 million to $200 million in just 8 years. He sold some of his stake in New York Central and invested most of it into stable government bonds. He was never the money-chasing kind of guy his dad was. All he wanted was to live his life in peace. And he hated being the richest man in the world, or at least that's what he told everyone who asked. At one point, he was so tired of being rich, he told his friend, quote, "I would not walk across the street to make $1 million," end quote. Owning a railway was too much pressure, and even though he was good at it, he had had enough. So when the time came for him to choose an heir, he split the Vanderbilt fortune between his 2 sons. Billy Vanderbilt was the first and only heir to grow the family fortune. All his kids and their kids, they just took and took and took. And what they quickly learned was that it might be difficult to make a $5.8 billion fortune in today's money, but it sure is easy to spend it. This is Alva Vanderbilt, wife of Cornelius' grandson, William Kissam Vanderbilt. If you had to blame someone for losing the Vanderbilt family fortune, she would be a good place to start. You see, back in the late 1800s, in New York, your position in society was a big deal. At the time when Alva married William, the Vanderbilt family was not included in the list of the 400 upper-class New York families. The women who created the list had no time for how unsophisticated the Vanderbilts were, and Billy didn't care if the family was on the list or not. But Alva did, so she set out to change that. She wanted to feel accepted by New York's upper-class snobs. And in order to do that, she hosted a massive party to reintroduce the House of Vanderbilt to the world. The party was attended by 1,000 people and cost William $6 million in today's money. Everyone attended, and suddenly, the Vanderbilts were in. But being accepted by New York's high society meant keeping up with appearances, which meant Alva needed to keep spending money. She built a massive home in the countryside, another mansion in New York, She made William buy her a $500,000 yacht with her name on it. It was like keeping up with the Joneses, but on a massive scale. Whatever money the two Vanderbilt brothers could add to the family fortune, Alva made sure it was quickly used up, but at least they were getting the respect they deserved. The problem was, 1, she was spending more than they were making, and 2, it's very easy to inflate your lifestyle, but it's very hard to cut back. But that didn't stop her, and soon the entire Vanderbilt family got addicted to the spending, and money started flying out of the Vanderbilt's coffers at record speeds. Alva rubbed off on the whole family. While Billy was still alive, he took a page out of her book and bought up an entire block on 5th Avenue to turn into one big mansion. For those that don't know, 5th Avenue in New York City is one of the most expensive shopping streets in the world today. Luckily, Billy's wife talked him out of it, so instead he built a couple of massive mansions that filled the block anyway. When one Vanderbilt child inherited $15.5 million, he celebrated by losing $70,000 on a single bet. That same grandson blew thousands on alcohol and unsurprisingly died of liver disease. The 3rd and 4th generation of Vanderbilts only knew how to do one thing: spend. They bought houses all over America, traveled the world, and did everything they could to enjoy every last cent the Commodore and Billy Vanderbilt had worked for. The problem was they never did anything to make more money. And at the time, the world was changing, faster than the Vanderbilt's old railway business could keep up with. And as the years went by, things only went from bad to worse for them. The early Vanderbilts had it easy. Their industries had very little regulation, and taxes weren't such a big deal. But by the early 20th century, the government introduced estate taxes, income taxes, gift taxes. Suddenly, these taxes were cutting into the millions the Vanderbilts had left. Then the Great Depression hit, and suddenly they had to scramble to find new ways to support themselves. All the while, no one did anything to keep the money they already had. By the end of World War II, planes and cars had taken over the role railroads used to play, so the Vanderbilt family sold what was left of their stake in New York Central. But they never established new businesses or investments to make their money work for them. Instead, they ended up spending whatever they had left. By the 1973 Vanderbilt family reunion, not even one family member was a millionaire. The only other big name to come out of the family was Gloria Vanderbilt, a popular fashion designer. And even then, she told her son there was no trust fund, no family fortune. That son was Anderson Cooper, today's CNN news anchor. Less than 150 years after the Commodore died, the Vanderbilt dynasty had lost it all. So next time you feel envious towards rich kids or trust fund babies, just remember that being born into wealth can be just as much of a curse as it is a blessing.